Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. One thing I speak about often, and for very good reason, is the concept of integration within the plant medicine space. Now, integration, as I see it, is really the process of turning our states into traits. And one of the main things that can block us in this process of transmutation is the idea of the ego's stories surrounding who we are and our experience of life as a whole. Today's guest on the show is a woman who has made it her mission in life to illuminate these ego stories for her clients that limit their personal and professional development, so they may rise to the occasion of their important mission and ultimately become the best versions of themselves. She is a creative coach and is the co-host of the Let's Go From Here podcast, which I was a guest on recently and had so much fun. And in this episode, we will be diving into her journey with psychedelic medicines, what her experiences have opened up for her in her life, and much, much more. So please give me a big hand and welcome in my dear friend, Farren Feiner, to the show. Farren, what is up? So good to have you here with me today.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate the joy and wisdom that you bring to this community, and I'm blessed to be here.
Thank you so much for the kind words. And guys, for everyone listening, Farren is someone that can charge my battery to 11 in the wise words of Spinal Tap very quickly. And before we hit record, we were just nerding out so much in the Law of One. We're both really close with a guy named Aaron Abke, who is amazing. For anyone listening, definitely check him out. You guys should have heard his podcast a few weeks back. But, Farren, where I really like to start these, we can go in so many different directions, but, how did you first become interested in psychedelic medicines, right? Was this something you grew up being okay with? Was it something that came later in life? Tell me everything.
I came from the age of dare and drugs being really bad. So it definitely wasn't something that was okay. It was conditioned within me that drugs were bad, fry your brain, ruin your life. You're a loser if you use drugs. And I really came to the psychedelic space through cannabis. I started using cannabis in college, and that lasted till my mid-30s, about, on and off, just for numbing purposes, party purposes. But I always really loved how I felt. Hence, there was years where I was like what used to be called a stoner. And it wasn't until the beginning of my spiritual awakening that I started meditating and kind of stumbled upon meditating with cannabis and using that to really start integrating new epiphanies and lessons that I was having. And in the past year, I've started using it for chronic pain and to really tap into my body and what's going in my tissues and integrating what traumas have been stored in my body. And in the past 3 months, especially using it to integrate the same kind of body pains that I was having from coming off of being on medication for ulcerative colitis the past 25 years. So it's been an interesting ride of cannabis being in my life to numb out with and not having any reverence for, and definitely not being a spiritual person at any capacity, to ending up on the path and then having such a reverence for it and it being such a gift and a blessing in my life to use as a modality to integrate things that have been coming up for me and that I've been working through.
Oh, it's so amazing to hear. And, everyone who listens to this show knows my affinity and love for the cannabis plant. And even though it feels like yesterday, I've been doing this cannabis work like in the way I'm doing right now for about 3 years. And when I first started tapping into this, I looked and scoured the internet for anything talking about this, and I couldn't find anything on it. And in the last 3 years, I'm not saying that I started this, but I'm just noticing that like so many people now are now feeling a very similar way surrounding cannabis. And in my mind, like I start wondering, like, is the consciousness of this plant starting to call upon those that have done the work to raise their frequency to a certain level, right? Where, when we were younger, there's all the programming around, like you said, DARE, which funniest acronym for DARE is drugs are really expensive. That was the going, saying in high school. But
I've heard that doing ayahuasca, realize everything or remember everything.
Yes, let's go. That one's a new one. I like that one. But it's funny because I know from me in my own journey, and it sounds like you too, right? We were influenced by how we had seen cannabis, right? Now, again, for me, like I found that I loved cannabis. I didn't believe in the this is your brain on drugs thing necessarily, especially when I started doing research, but I wasn't aware of how deep cannabis can go. And I wasn't aware of the level of programming that had been placed upon me, right? I thought it was just this is your brain on drugs and things like that. But also there's like a more subtle layer of how cannabis is depicted in media, right? So when you look at Cheech and Chong, when you look at all those early 2000s movies, American Pie, when you look at Road Trip, when you look at a couple other ones, Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, it was kind of just this like plant that's kind of like stupid, you smoke it, you get dumb, you eat food, like, and that was like what I was seeing, right? So the stories, right? Because I know you're big on stories too. The stories of a culture get integrated into us without us even really realizing, right? And so I now believe that a lot of us are shedding those stories because we've done the work and continue to do the work to be able to raise our frequency. And now it's almost as the plant is like, okay, you've now graduated to a new level and we can start having deeper talks here. So there's like this feeling now of like so many people being like, hey, I really want to hold this in reverence. I really want to make sure I'm connecting with it intentionally, right? Like, why is that happening, right? How we do anything is how we do everything. So if we are not in an intentional lifestyle, not developing ourselves, it would make sense that cannabis may not present itself that way. But on the other hand, now that a lot of us are starting to really understand the power of intention and start to experience that power, start to experience what releasing trauma feels like in these kind of things, it's almost as if like we're graduating from high school to college, where now the plant can be like, okay, I know you can actually handle and you're really listening to what I want to share. So now I'm going to be able to teach you to deeper levels. And I'm curious, like, has that been something that you felt, right? Like as you've developed, as you've been in 4DU and all the stuff you've done, have you felt like the experiences you've had with the plants have gone deeper in a way?
Yes. As you were saying that, I was like, oh, this resonates, because to even back up, when I started meditating, I started intuitively meditating with cannabis, but still had that dichotomy of feeling like, oh, you're a loser, or why are you smoking weed, and all that conditioning was still in there. And I was always sitting with, but I'm having these huge epiphanies and realizations and understandings and a felt sense in my body from connecting with this plant and using it in this way, but then also being perceived as like the conditioning that I was taught growing up and programmed to. And it wasn't until I found you actually that I heard somebody speaking to the reverence of this plant and what it could actually do, where I was like, oh, huge light bulb moment. Okay, this is giving me permission to take back what cannabis is to me and how I connect with it, and quit judging myself for it, and realize the storylines I have around it, and to be able to use it without shame. Not that that just went away overnight. It's a process that I still work on, but definitely removing so much of the stigmas that I had around it, and really coming to a love and gratitude practice with it, that it has freed me spiritually and physically from so many traumas that I've been storing in my mind and in my body. Not that it's the only way, but it has been assisting me in very deep, deep ways. And especially since coming off medication, I was on medication for 25 years. So there was so much emotion in me that had been suppressed and that wasn't able to let out. And when I got off medication, not only did my work just spiritually become so much deeper, but the work with the plant also has reached new levels. The storylines that I had, I was very familiar with. I've been doing a lot of shadow work and inner child work for about 5 years now. And there's not a lot of new storylines coming up, but the perspective is so much broader, and the understanding and the depths into the darkness, which I'm able to go and alchemize into that lighter frequency and just release from my energy field, have been, I don't have words for it. I'm so grateful. Like the love that I emanate on a regular basis, I didn't even think was a thing. I didn't know it was a thing. Like I just am constantly, my ego's baffled by like, wow, we're here. Like, this is what life's about now. Okay. Like, this is awesome.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. It's so amazing to hear that, and I've had very similar experiences within, my life when it comes to cannabis and other plant medicines as well. And I'd love if you could dive into a little bit more of like your process when it comes to working with cannabis to get off your medication, what you found in that process of like, for instance, like, when it comes to releasing stored emotions from the body, have you found any specific like modalities that work really well for you with cannabis? Like, do you like meditating? Do you like doing breath work? Like, give us a little insight in terms of like what your process looks like, because I think for a lot of people, this is still very new to think that cannabis can do the same things that psilocybin or ayahuasca or these things can do. And albeit it does work a little bit differently, but these things are completely possible with cannabis. I mean, some of my biggest shifts in life have come as a result of connecting with cannabis consciously. So I'd love if you could share a little bit of your experience of like specifically like how this happened, right? When you got off medication, like what led you to get off medication and kind of what that whole journey looked like. Because I imagine for many listeners tuning in right now, they either themselves or someone they know is going through something similar, and so having this information out there is so important. And I'm so grateful to be able to chat with you about this stuff because it matters so much. I mean, there's so much suffering going on in the world that otherwise does not need to be done, right? Like, we can release these things. We don't need to live with these things for a lifetime. They can actually, I wouldn't say go away, but be remediated in a way where then they're not something we have to stray away from. We can bring these parts back into our wholeness and love them, because that's what I found they're really looking for. So I'm curious what your process looks like with that and kind of what your journey's been since getting off medication, how long it took, things like that. I'm curious.
Yeah. A little bit of a backstory. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was 16 years old. It went undiagnosed for a while, so it had developed to a pretty, what they told me was extreme case. And they put me in the hospital immediately. I was on IV for 2 weeks, like no food, just IV. It was really traumatic. I had lost so much blood. My blood had stopped running to my limbs and was only running to my vital organs. And that was like extremely painful. And I meanwhile have doctors telling me they need to do experimental surgery on me. They're going to need to cut out my colon. I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. And they don't know why, but it's usually hereditary. And meanwhile, no one in my family has ever had any kind of IBD ever. And after 2 weeks, I remember I looked at my mom and I was like, I'm not going to get better in here. I need to get out. And the doctor ended up releasing me that day. And I started taking medication. It took a while to heal from the steroids I was on and that whole ordeal. I missed the first couple months of my senior year in high school. Fast forward to 2019 when I had, I guess, what I call like the start of my spiritual awakening, kind of started diving into meditation and stuff, found Dr. Joe pretty quickly, became aware of people healing themselves. I even went to well, I've been to multiple of his retreats, but the first one I went to, a guy with ALS got out of his wheelchair and walked. There was a woman with like stage 4 cancer, riddled all over her body, gone. Like, you know, and I'm seeing like, oh, I believed in it. And he explains the science like so amazingly well, but it's still like, okay, sure. You know, it's still hard to wrap. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around, like, really though? And yeah, so I became aware of the fact that I could heal myself, what my body was doing. I also became aware of the fact that the medication I was on was making me asymptomatic, but that didn't mean that what was going on in my body was fixed. Just because I wasn't expressing symptoms, which now I know are really the body's way of healing and aren't something bad or wrong, that I was completely just shut off to the fact that anything was happening in my body. So at that time, I started cleaning up my diet more, and going off medication was going to be future me's problem. I was not ready to deal with that. In 2021, I ended up having a Kundalini awakening, and I had no idea what was going on with me. I didn't know what that was. I still had, yeah, I mean, I grew up Jewish, and from the time I can remember, I was like, I'm not buying religion. This doesn't sit with me. It's used to separate and divide people. And I am not down with God. I'm not into this. So I've come a long way since then. But yes. So I had this Kundalini awakening, and then it was like a flood of emotions and realizations. I kind of had an idea what was going on because of how Dr. Joe explains a little about it, but not fully. But I knew like I was shaking so much because there was trauma in my body that needed to be cleared out, whether it was physical or karmatically. And pretty soon afterwards, I got the hit, like, you need to get off medication to clear all this energy that's being trapped in your body out. And at the time I was like, noted, still future me's problem. Like, I am not ready to do that. And September of last year, I was having like chronic shoulder pain, and I started working with a body worker, and I was using cannabis when he was working on me, as well as without it on my own, to work with my shoulder. And I started being able to really feel everything in my shoulder. My shoulder was speaking to me. It was telling me what storylines were coming up that were being held in there. Like, your right shoulder is where you hold anger, is one of the places where you hold anger, as through Chinese medicine and also German new medicine. And this is, you know, known in spiritual communities. So I had started kind of working with that and getting mobility back in my shoulder just by sitting with it. And I would interact with cannabis. I would sit with it and I would ask it, does it have anything to tell me? I would stretch it to the point of, not I was in pain, but the edge of uncomfortability for me, and try to relax it and try to send my energy to it by just putting my concentration on that area. And this is where the connecting with cannabis really was helpful too, because it let me really go deep with that sensation. You know, we know you got to feel it to heal it as far as emotions go, but it's the same in your body. I was really feeling into that sensation, making space for it, being like, okay, I can hold this sensation. Can I relax into it? What do you have to tell me? And this was going on also while I was doing the same thing when I was working with my body worker. And in July, I started with 4DU. Actually, we're doing a Kundalini cleanse, which is this amazing cleanse protocol that Aaron Apke put together. And it came through pretty immediately. You're stopping medication now. And it was not me, Ryan. I had been connected to my intuition and my higher self, and I have gotten downloads and things before of this nature, but like, it definitely, that calling came from not me. It was loud and clear. And I was like, shit. I was terrified.
Yeah.
So, but I think also I had mentioned doing the work on the shoulder because this allowed me to transition as I was stopping medication. On a side note, I had started maybe for the past month or two beforehand, taking like 1 day on, 1 day off, and then 1 day on, 2 days off of my medication. And I was just kicking in withdrawals and then stopping them and giving myself a headache. So I don't recommend that to anyone.
Don't prolong it. Yeah.
I didn't realize what was going on, and I never get headaches. And I was like, why am I getting headaches? So it wasn't until I stopped completely and the same type of headache sensation came that I was like, oh, duh, okay, got it. Mm-hmm. So when I stopped the medication, so much fear that had just been living within me was asking to be held. And so many different sensations, not only from my body changing, but from finally having, there's a lot of in your intestinal area is where you also hold anger and grief and fear. You know, it's right there by all the lower three chakras. So it's getting, you know, all the stress and anxiety of your life. And it asked me to do the same thing with cannabis. I started connecting with cannabis and then just putting my hands over different places that I was having sensations in my body and doing the same thing, making space for the sensation, allowing my ego story of fear, I'm going to die, I'm going to end up back in the hospital, I'm going to die, basically was the root of all the fears coming up for me. So just really allowing that, understanding these were all ego stories and working with that in that aspect, as well as with affirmations and finding a higher power. For me now, I do call it God. I took that word back for me because I had a charge against it for so long because of how I was conditioned to it. So now I love to call it God, but source, creator, whatever is resonating for you, go with that. I still was working with my body worker who is incredible. And I haven't talked to anybody else really who has worked with a body worker before, but he basically is playing my fascial tissue to like completely reset it. Because through this journey, I also had no idea that I had CPTSD, which is developmental PTSD from childhood. I was a bit of a latchkey kid. I didn't realize that. I had abandonment. Well, because my parents worked full time. And so they just weren't around, you know, and I didn't realize because I had parents in my life and they'd come home and stuff, but I never put two and two together. And I didn't even know what CPTSD was till 2 months ago when I found out about the ACE study, which is adverse childhood experiences. No idea. Took that. They have a quiz about developmental trauma on there. It's only like 10 questions, but this was so mind-blowing because if you answer yes, you get a point. So I have a 4 out of 10 on the point scale. And for each point that you have, you're 20% more likely to have an autoimmune disease. And if you have any sort of CPTSD, you are 70 to 80% more likely to wind up in the hospital from an autoimmune disease. And I was like, oh shit. So realizing that was also still it's in my tissues. I've done a lot of cognizant work, like a lot of my shadow work and inner child work. Not that that's ever done, but I've done a lot of that work. And there's a lot of deep body being more embodied now. It's really a calling to come into my body, feel what I need to feel or whatever needs to be processed in there and stop numbing out so much in my head, actually. And the body worker was such a phenomenal way to do that too, because the second I came off of medication, those sessions got wild. Something started coming out of me that I didn't know. Like I wouldn't have thought like, oh, I'm an angry person, or I wouldn't characterize myself as like in grief. I didn't realize I had grief in me at all. But working with him and with cannabis in particular for me has allowed me to let go of so much grief and anger that I'm holding in my tissues. So while he's resetting my tissues, because the trauma that's stored in your body comes out physiologically.
Yeah. I always get that wrong. Physiologically, I'm like, that's a mouthful.
But it's like, that's why I'm clenching my shoulder. That's why I'm having this chronic shoulder pain from holding that distortion of anger there, clenching my shoulder. I'm clenching in my glutes and in my abdomen in different places because my body is so used to also being in fight or flight for my entire childhood and developmental ages that it's just kind of stuck in being in that same space of trying to protect itself. So it's still expressing as the only way it's known it was safe pretty much its whole life to be kind of scared and on the lookout and untrusting. And so cannabis has really been facilitating me coming back home to myself and moving through this extremely gnarly process, but so rewarding and beautiful and amazing that I sit here and I'm like, oh shit, I did this. And I'm so proud of myself. I held so much fear and anger that is still coming up, that is, I'm sure, going to be coming up for a while, but it's like, oh, I can do this. I can hold this fear. I can hold when these sensations come up. I've noticed the pattern that I've had around coming off of medication. It's like I get a sensation, I freak out, and then I hit the reprogramming hard. I use some self-hypnosis and tune in, connect with cannabis, tune in, and the body working has been and the affirmations and the true surrendering to a higher power, and that everything is happening to me for my greatest good, is meant for me to alchemize in this lifetime if I choose to, and which I'm ready to get off this karma wheel. I was kind of like, this ends now.
Yeah.
So
this is my line in the sand.
Yeah. So that was like a very long answer to how I've been dealing with this. But I think, like, for me at least, I was seeing people heal like either just spontaneously through Dr. Joe, or they had just done it and they were just in the bliss of it all, which does happen, and rightfully so. But I really wanted to like dig into how many layers were going on, and it wasn't kind of just like a poof or a one and done, or like I connected with cannabis and that was it kind of thing.
Oh, 100%. Like, that was beautiful, Farren, because there was a lot of things I heard in there that are directly in alignment with how I look at cannabis in terms of like a healing medicine, and also an ally, right? So one of the things is that cannabis can enter us into alpha and theta brainwaves, or it does enter us into alpha and theta brainwaves. And, while alpha is most well known for the flow state, theta, on the other hand, is the suggestible brainwave state that hypnosis works on, right? So if you're getting yourself connected with cannabis, then you're doing body work, and then you're also doing affirmations in that type of state of being, you're going to be able to more easily impression yourself to believe and hold those belief systems, and then also be able to remediate what's going on in the body, right? Because where a lot of people are stuck right now, myself included for many years, is that we live from our head, right? We're very left brain dominant. We've been trained through positive reinforcement to go from our brain, right? Our left brain specifically, because all growing up, it wasn't, who are you? It was, what do you do? What do you produce? How well can you memorize these answers and get good answers and get good grades on tests and things like that? So even though it wasn't specifically society telling us we want you to be left-brained, the only activities we did, especially in our developmental ages, were primarily based on left brain activities. And so we've mostly become very dominant in this left brain approach to life. And so when we're stuck in our head, we're not going to be able to have that somatic connection to the body. And so this is one of the many reasons that I'm so in love with the cannabis plant, because, with mushrooms, like, it's not that you can't do body work with them and things like that. But your ego is moving closer to the unconscious when it comes into like high doses of psilocybin and things like that. Of course, high doses of cannabis can do this too. But the great thing about cannabis is that when you were working with your body worker, I imagine you could still hold a conversation, right? Without feeling really awkward, right? Like, it's really hard to do that with other medicines. So it's not that they can't help. They definitely can, right? But in terms of practicality, cannabis is the medicine, right? It is the people's plant, right? Because especially in today's world where most of us work very often, we have busy lives, we're go, go, go. Cannabis can still fit inside of that type of lifestyle, right? Not that a go, go, go lifestyle is the healthiest lifestyle to have, right? But if someone very much like yourself, very much like me, realizes at a certain point, oh my goodness, this is not what I want my life to look like, but currently my life does look like that, then you can't just quit your job, stop paying your mortgage, and just move to the jungle, right? Like there's steps that you're going to have to go through. And so for me, what was really beneficial was while I was still working at the job I did not like anymore, that was no longer in alignment, while I was thinking about creating my business, cannabis was able to fit into there and not disintegrate me so much that I had to spend a week or more integrating thereafter. And so it's really amazing how you can have one foot on the ground, one hand in the clouds with cannabis and pull those ideas down and be able to get that somatic connection to the body and release that trauma. And that is like one of the main like healing powers and benefits of cannabis, right? Like, why do we think that cannabis and yoga are so closely linked, right? Why do we think Yogananda and Ganesh Baba and all of these like incredible yogis loved cannabis, right? Well, it wasn't because they wanted to watch Netflix and get high, right? No judgment, right? Like that stuff can be fun, right? But they understood something we are only starting to understand again, which is that cannabis is here divinely to assist us in our process of ascension, because the 3D realm is messy, right? Like third dimensional consciousness is not exactly an easy realm to live in. And that's where we talk about, ascending to the fourth dimension is really understanding and learning love, right? And how to love and these kind of things. But when we're in the 3D, we still have this like illusion of separation, right? The opposite of oneness, the lack of connection, right? Lack of source energy and these kind of things. And so it can be really challenging, especially in today's world, navigating jobs and all of these things, to be like, you know what? I'm going to go meditate on top of that mountain for 2 years and maybe something happens and I'm going to figure it out, right? Like at the end of the day, most people don't have the luxury of being able to do that. And so cannabis and these other medicines can allow us to experience like, whoa, okay, there are definitely new levels here. Then from that experience, that's going to really rev up inspiration and dedication to spiritual practices. The more you dedicate yourself to those, the more bang for your buck you're going to get. And so it's this positive energetic loop, right? When you become conscious with your life in general, but especially the components of it, such as cannabis, now you start actually communicating with the plant. And it's no longer a one-sided relationship. It's a power couple dynamic. And then from there, what you can do is really allow that plant to help you release what is no longer looking to be carried by you, so that not only you, but also all future generations will not have to go through that distortion. So I absolutely love this, Farren. This is amazing.
Yeah. And it feels like I can even tap into a lot of distortions that are within me that clearly aren't mine. I'm like, I know this isn't mine, but it's generationally just been in there for so long. So yeah,
definitely. Yeah, there's one specific one that I know of right now in my body that I had known for quite a while that something was off, because I love speaking, but I always get like a lot of nerves, especially public speaking, for sure. Big podcasts and things like that. Like, yeah, I'll get some butterflies, nothing crazy, but there's been this like deep fear of like really what I feel as being seen and heard, when in reality, like that doesn't feel like me at all. Like, I've been an extrovert my whole life. And that was one of the biggest challenges with being diagnosed with anxiety, because I'm like, what do you mean? I have people around me all the time. Like my parents' house has been the hangout house my whole life when I was a kid. Now I have friends all over the world, right? Like, what is this, right? And so, that was really interesting to dive into, because my friend Brianna recently did an aura reading on me. And she was like, wow, you got rainbows coming out of you. This is amazing. I'll have to connect you with her. She's super gifted in this realm. And for anyone who's interested in hearing this, hit me up. I'll give you her info. But she's amazing. And she draws these unbelievable drawings. Like, they're incredible. Like, you'll get a whole drawing if you do your entire, I forget what she calls it, soul blueprint, I think. She said rainbows are really rare. And so she saw this rainbow coming out of my heart chakra. And I was like, oh, it's really cool. But she's like, one thing I do see is this dense, like blue energy on the backside of your throat chakra that is essentially scared, but it has very important like research and findings for you, basically. And she said, yeah, it's probably going to, interfere with neck issues and things like that. And for the longest time, I've always had tight neck and headaches right on the right side of my head, right? Almost so much that I'm like, did I get assassinated in a previous life or something? Did I get like a bullet through my skull? Because that's what it feels like when the headache starts. And it goes directly from the back of the right side of my head right through to my right eye. And it just pulses in this line. I don't get it too often anymore, but that was one of those things where I was like, wow, like there are definitely still distortions in here, right? And like you said, I'm not sure if we ever fully heal. I don't even know if that's the point of it, but it is super interesting, right? So that's like my new thing I'm working on with cannabis right now is like, please show me, help me, and teach me how to move through this and accept it and love it the way that it wants to be loved, right? So that then it can change its entire like program, if you will, from something that is limiting me to something that becomes empowering to me. So it's really cool.
Yeah, that is so cool. It's fascinating because our 4 top chakras are all open. It's our 3 lower ones that get distortions in them. So when you're able to sit and ask, like it's representing your throat, right? And that might be, I currently am going through growing and letting go of a lot of energy in my solar plexus and my yellow ray, because I have a lot of distortions around being bullied and how I'm able to relate to others, fear of rejection, all the kind of stuff that comes along also with doing podcasts, public speaking, that kind of thing. So I've been called a lot to put a lot of attention there and try to open it. But when we dig into if it's actually a pain that's physically coming out in our bodies and it's a blessing because it is asking you to learn something and you have something to be in communication with and be patient around to kind of tell you what you need to know, what the next steps are, whatever you need to start integrating. So it's coming from that different lens, like you were talking about, of what is the learning here? So no victim is here. There is no victim within me. I am oneness. I have come here for a reason. Everybody's story is exponentially more important than they will ever know. And they deserve for it to be told and it to be heard, regardless of how they feel or whatever's getting in the way of that. And what we've come here, it's our karma. It's what we've come here to alchemize. It's the energies that are distortions that are stopping us from really connecting with the truth of who we are and the remembering of who we actually are, which is kind of this fun game we're playing, and reframe it into a game. It's important to have a sense of humor about things if you can, when things get intense, because it's been so powerful to question it, to not look at anything from a victim mentality like we are totally conditioned and trained to do. And it's really normal and it really takes practice. It doesn't mean that my first thought isn't maybe a victim mentality thought, but I always am quick now to be like, what's the learning here? And that has also come through continual affirmations, catching those ego stories and just affirming the opposite. Even if I didn't feel it at the time, it's like growing a muscle. You got to do it again and again and again. Like it is your job, and believing in that higher power. And I trust and surrender and know that any catalyst that is being brought up into my life is being brought up to heal. So I've been doing this for a long time, and it's gotten to the point where I'm like, yes, let's go. Like this energy is the sooner I turn towards loving this energy and feeling into it, the sooner I'm going to release it and feel lighter and more love. Now, does that happen in one sitting? Sometimes. And sometimes it's a deeper storyline that you're working on for months, years, but at the end of the day, always coming from it with love. And love is going to be the curiosity around it. And that's what's really going to allow you to start healing it. And that's going to look different for everyone, but without that acceptance and immediate love around it and the reframing of I am not a victim, what is this teaching me?
Absolutely. I mean, you said that perfectly. And, we could have a 2-hour riff session on the victim mentality and how brutal that is happening in humanity right now.
Oof.
And how much it's being incentivized, right? Like, one of my mentors, Mark England, who I think you would love considering you're into stories, he has a whole modality called story work. And so basically what he does is this 4-step process where you dive into the unconscious stories running behind the scenes of your life, right? Mm-hmm. And the Carl Jung quote that I love most is, until you bring the unconscious into the conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. Right. So like that's one of my favorite quotes of all time, because it's a constant reminder to me that when these stories do come up, it's happening regardless, right? Like the story's happening regardless. The only choice we have is how we choose to view it. And in one way, if we choose to view it as the victim, we will then become the victim, right? Not because we are one, but because we are powerful and we are creating that reality for ourselves in believing that we are the victim based on the impressions of society and what they tell us makes us a victim, right? Because the powers that be, government, whatever you want to call it, they have no interest in empowering us, because empowered people are much harder to control. And at the end of the day, it's much harder to run a business, which is really what the government is and what the US is and what a lot of these governments are in the world. It's really hard to run those when people are starting to go, you know what? I don't think I need anything except a good bonfire and some people around me and some good food that I can grow myself and medicines I can grow myself. Like that is the opposite and antithesis of everything that the powers that be want, right? They want us to rely on them. And so what's the best way to do that is to disempower people on a media level, right? So when you're going through Instagram and you're seeing these things, right? If you've been affected, you are a victim. And then also hacking the dopaminergic system, right? Like hacking that system so we become addicts of our own dopamine and we don't really have the awareness or bandwidth to ever go deeper into the experience that is us, right? So you have all these things working, but if you choose to view this story as like, okay, this is happening for me rather than to me. I choose to believe that this is happening this way because I understand I am the creator of my reality and I must wield my power with intention and be responsible with it. So I'm now going to see this story that maybe is lived within me that I am a victim from a curiosity standpoint, right? Where did I learn this? Is this mine? Did I inherit this from my lineage? Is this something maybe I picked up later in life? And then, like you said, being able to provide loving awareness to this aspect of self, because the same way that if we choose to not see ourselves as a victim, then even those that wrong us in our lives can be teachers, right? So, I talk about this often, how, I love my mother to death, but at the same time, we butt heads a lot, right? And we've been super close my entire life, same with my father before he passed. And my dad was definitely someone who would push my buttons too, right? But, it took me a long time to realize like, wow, this woman has signed up for one of the hardest missions I've ever seen a human soul go through, right? So she signed up for a lifetime where she would disempower herself, she would play the victim, etc. And this doesn't make her a bad person or anything. It's just like, that's the generation. Like they just didn't know what they didn't know. She got told she had a degenerative disc disease like 20 years ago. And the doctor at the time, because I don't understand why doctors don't know more than they do, but that's another conversation for another day. But basically he was like, there's nothing you can do. Just go home and get comfortable, basically. Like, not that you're going to die immediately or anything, but like, there's nothing we can do. You're going to be in pain the rest of your life. Don't move. And that is like the worst advice you can give anyone, because not only is that physical condition a manifestation of trauma and unconscious stories to begin with, because it's right around the sacral and root chakras, which are like all about like safety, security, etc. But also it's catalysted her into like, oh, this is my life now, right? So for a long time, I tried to help her and I would get frustrated, right? Like, why isn't she taking my assistance? Why isn't she, open to hearing like different ways of looking at this? But then as I got older and I got wiser, I started realizing like, well, as a projector in human design, my natural tendency is to want to share with people. But a lot of times people aren't going to be willing to hear that. And that's not something that's going to be good for them or me, right? Because it's like a block of energy, right? So I waste my energy doing it and they don't want it, right? So it's kind of like impeding on their free will. And so then I looked at like my mother is like, oh, wow, well, Okay, so my mother knows how to push my buttons. She's also someone that I love dearly that is not open to assistance, right, with these things. So can I love her anyway, right? Or is my love being dictated by if someone listens to me? That was a huge lesson in and of itself. But then secondly, if my mother, if I can become okay with my mother pushing my buttons and not feeling as though I need to react around her, then good luck to anyone in the world triggering me, right? Like if I can be around her and she can try as she might, right? Not even really trying, just like unconsciously trying to trigger me, and I can be okay with that. Well, now I'm actually fit to be on stages where I'm going to face a lot of adversity, right? And talking about conscious cannabis, talking about different ways to heal yourself and all of these things, like we face adversity, right, in the world, right? Like people call us quacks, people call us crazy, right? So it was almost like I realized, like, wow, my mom signed up to make me unfuckwithable. And like I've always looked at that, or I had looked at it my whole life as like this annoyance. But now I'm actually seeing it as like my greatest catalyst for actually becoming my full self. And so again, like that's an example of how like these stories can either disempower us or empower us. Same story, right? The story did not change, right? She didn't stop triggering me. She didn't take my help, right? Like she didn't start diving into this stuff, but I chose to view it differently. And someone that, even though I love was an annoyance, right, in my early 20s, right, now is like my greatest teacher of all time, And so I totally feel what you're talking about when you're saying those stories and giving them love, right? Because they're there to teach us things, but our ego wants to make us the victim because it doesn't want to admit that we have anything to learn because it wants to believe that it's already got it all figured out. When in reality, it's living in the illusion of separation. And from that point of view, it will never have it figured out, So I highly agree. It was amazing that you went into that because it brought that up for me.
Wait, can we dig in? Because that's like such a perfect microcosm of the macrocosm.
Yeah.
Because it is that point of taking radical responsibility for your feelings. And that's something I came to terms with, and a lot of people in victim consciousness, which is most of us. I'm new to even reframing these beliefs that I have out of that. But I know that I was put here to have the parents that I have experience the ulcerative colitis. I was causing the ulcerative colitis in myself. I take radical responsibility for that. The same way you're starting to take radical responsibility for your feelings towards your mother. It's nobody else can do anything to you. You are giving away your power. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with feeling a charge for something, feeling that negative energy come through you. And that's what is meant to happen. It's no big deal. It's just negative energy. It's really taking that radical responsibility for, oh, my body is telling me that something is off. Like, what am I thinking right now? Where am I feeling that in my body? Whatever is resonating for you at the time, to connect, to slow down, to take a breath, whatever you have to do, and allow that energy to move without being reactive. Or sometimes I'm like, oh, good to know. I'm going to meditate on that later. I do keep a journal of stuff that I have a charge around. And I think it's really indicative of, like you were talking about, the government and society and what is being shown to us now. Like, it's so amazing, this great awakening that we are going through as a collective. And there's so much information out there, and people have a lot of resources and tools and knowledge, and it's now calling for us to drop into our hearts. So we know, like, when it comes to our own personal stories, we have to feel it to heal it, but we look outside of us and we're still judging the collective and in victim consciousness to the collective and the atrocities going on in the world. And it's like, take radical responsibility for you. Your negative energy is also feeding into that. And I'm seeing a lot of this where the spiritual community is starting to separate and become divided over this. And it's a process coming back into your heart. So I get it, but it's really coming from that loving place. I'm not saying don't take action. Don't feel like you want things to change. Don't make moves towards that. Do it, but do it from a place of like love and understanding, and looking at that other being and knowing that other being is perfect and doing what it's meant to be doing. And I don't have to agree with it or want it around me or any of those things, but I have to love and accept it. and move from there. And it brings up, like, also, like you were talking about with your mother, David Hawkins, power versus force. Am I forcing this person to feel my beliefs because I'm right and that's my way or the highway, and that's the kind of energetics that you're coming from? Or are you in your sovereign authority of love and acceptance for that person or that situation, and knowing like that doesn't jive with me and I'm not allowing that into my space, or I'm able to hold that and move through it? So yeah, that was such a good example of all of it.
It's amazing. And this is an incredible riff sesh here because, what I found is that like there are so many people that want to feel adverse to this. Like, no, but like the terrors in the world, like there are bad people. And I'm like, listen, those things are happening regardless of how you choose to perceive them. And this is one of the biggest challenges with the news and all of this stuff, right? Well, what about what's happening in the Ukraine? What are you going to do about what's happening in the Ukraine? Probably nothing. So why are you inundating yourself with problems that you can't solve? There is nothing that the average person can do to help that, aside from maybe donation or whatever it is, right? Depending on your beliefs of what's going on over there, right? But this is a perfect example of how, like, at the end of the day, you can either choose to view it as like, man, the world's a terrible place. There's a lot of stuff going on. And abracadabra, you will spell that into existence for yourself. The world will be a scary, fucked up place, right? If you choose to believe it is, right? But at the same time, there is equal evidence to suggest that the world is incredible, right? And absolutely amazing, and everything's on the up and up. But here's the thing, right? For a lot of people, they hold on, they white knuckle to their belief systems. And the prize they get is they get to keep them, right? And I think a lot of people are unaware of the great responsibility that comes along with the great power of us being able to create our own reality, right? And the other thing too is that I know for me, for many years, like I would hear this and intellectually I'd be like, yes, that makes sense. But then when my body would react, I would fall into my old patterns, right? And so I had to understand that the mind is going to want to change immediately, right? Like it can make changes almost immediately, right? But the body's going to take some time to catch up. So it's now, instead of the mind being like, oh, there's the body doing its annoying thing again, right? Be like, no, mind, how can you meet the body where it's at? And also, what can the body teach you, right? Like the body's taught me, my mind, to slow down. That it's not negative to have a fast moving mind necessarily, but if that's your only switch, if like me for many years, your switch is stuck between yes and, there's not going to be a lot of room from which to actually slow down, process trauma, feel things to heal them, and ultimately get to smell the roses every once in a while. And that's like the funniest thing that I experience in my deep psychedelic journeys is like how like I have this whole plan for like things I want to traverse and things I want to see and intentions. And half the time I end up just staring at the ceiling in complete bliss. So grateful for the little things in life, and when you turn down the frequency of all of those stories and you get yourself away from watching the news and taking in other people's bullshit and, them making you feel as though, or you making you feel rather, that you have to be inundated with this information that you have no way of actually being a helping hand in. When you get yourself out of all of that, the mission in life becomes quite simple, right? Doesn't mean it's easy, but it becomes simple. Like, how can I purify myself to become a lighthouse? So then when I go out into the world, those that are looking for the lighthouse will see my light, come to me, and then hopefully I can help them turn their lighthouse on. And then they are going to be people that are going out into the world. And as they meet people that are ready to get turned on, their lighthouse to be turned on, they're going to be able to turn them on, and so on and so forth, right? Like, that's as simple as I really think our entire process of evolution here can be. Now, within that, of course, there's complexities, there's intricacies, but, I've really thought of it as that simple recently. It's just like, how can I allow myself to be me so unapologetically that at the end of the day, maybe it triggers the hell out of certain people. Good, right? Like that means those people weren't right for me and I wasn't right for them, right? But to the degree that I try to dim my own light to help other people that are maybe not exactly okay with seeing a light shine so bright, to the degree I do that, I actually don't help them at all, right? Because I'm thwarting my own self to be able to help them, which you can't really lend a helping hand unless you're helping yourself first. And at the other end, the people that were ready to accept my full light so they could shine their full light on, I'm not going to be able to help them now because I've spread my energy and attention and just my light too thin, right? So it's amazing when we really dive into these things because, again, like I feel these conversations are so important to have because within the psychedelic space, like a lot of people have no idea these things are possible, right? So like, yeah, go have amazing experiences, right? But at the end of the day, realize that you can have you can have an amazing life. And that's really what these medicines are here to be able to teach us, right? Yes, we can watch funny movies. Yes, like there's no judgment on that, right? Have you ever wondered why that movie wasn't funny without anything? What if it could be? Well, these medicines can teach you how to make that an all the time thing. And I think that is really beautiful.
Yeah. And what you spoke to was really beautiful, just to go into that a little bit more. It's really when you are in alignment with yourself, and as long as you're just working to the best of your ability to come from a place of love and be in alignment with your truth, that is when you're doing the greatest service to you, to the other person, regardless of their reaction. If you're being in alignment and you're channeling source energy and source wants you to speak to that person in a way or point something out and that triggers them or gets an energetic charge within them, that source giving them the gift of looking at that charge if they so choose to. So all you have to do is flow in your love energy, and in that knowing, you're acting from what you believe is the greatest good for all and your own knowing. And you act from that place. And if you find out you could have done better in a certain situation or whatever, then you grow, and that's for you to then open up and deal with. But it's also holding that vision, like you were talking about, like affecting community, and you affect everyone that you come in contact with, and that affects their day and who they come in contact with. And that's really what it's about, is a collective consciousness. We are one, and being able to hold a higher vision for all of us, holding that vibration of love energy, regardless of what's going on around you, and not coming to it like, we're at war, there's going to be a world war. Like, I know this is the worst it's ever been. Future is so dismal. Like, I understand that it could feel that way, and there's nothing wrong with it feeling that way. But then it's the reframe of, it doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve them. It doesn't serve the collective for me to add negative energy to our collective consciousness that's being played out before us. It really, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where the integration really starts. Can I keep my high vibration love energy for the collective, not only for myself and feeling it and healing it within myself and going through my own day and my own energetic charges and catalysts and distortions and dealing with all that on your own. But then when you look out around you, can you still hold that high vibration and that love and that vision of how you want the future to look? And I think, that is exactly what you said, that we will manifest that. It's amazing. People look at all the things that they manifest for themselves, but don't want to take responsibility for the negative manifestations that are coming into their lives or the negative manifestations that are on this planet right now. But I really know that that is what's happening. And that's why I have such a strong faith and belief in that my future is going to look beautiful for this planet. I don't know if I'll still be here when it happens, but I know it will. I have faith that it will. I'm holding that vision for us as a collective, that we are in our infancy of evolution. And that's why you see so many awakenings right now, so many kundalinis popping off. We're starting to evolve to that next density level, that green ray level. Our nervous systems are starting to go through that change of being able to hold higher frequency in this third body, this third density body that isn't meant to hold, these higher frequencies. That's kind of what Kundalini is facilitating, so that we physically, literally are upping the energy level that's on this planet right now.
That was beautiful, Farren. Like, it really tunes me into how grateful I am to be alive during this time, because it really is like a wild time. Like, I feel as though, I've said this before in this show, but it really is the best analogy for this. So have you ever seen Independence Day before? The old movie about aliens and whatnot?
When it came out, Ryan. So
yeah. A far back time. Yeah. So there's a scene where shit's really going to hell in a handbasket, and the president goes to Area 51, and they go to underground, and they meet that guy with the long gray hair, the scientist. And they're like, oh man, shit's crazy up there. Like, how are things going on down here? And he's like, are you kidding me? Shit's amazing. He's like, we've had this ship for like 30 years, hasn't done anything. And now all of a sudden all these buttons are turned on. Like, this is awesome. And the president's like, what the hell is wrong with you, right? That's how I feel right now because, oftentimes you hear people, oh, it's never been this bad. Has it really never been this bad? Or have we never been awake enough to see the distortions that we're seeing now, right? Like, when you look at like horrible things going on, like pedophilia in Hollywood, shit's been happening for a long time. The difference is now we're aware of it. And we're also aware of how much like that's fucked up, right? And so like we're more light and love is hitting the planet than ever. And for a lot of us, it seems worse than ever, not because it actually is, but because we're more aware, we have eyes to see now. And so that ability to be able to recognize that and go, oh, that's actually beautiful, because that means that the more of us that see this, the more of us that start doing this type of work, the more we're going to be able to continue evolving into higher and higher dimensions and higher qualities of fulfillment of life, right? And so I absolutely love that. And Farren, this has been absolutely amazing. I can't wait to have you back on for round 2. We're going to need to split this in 2 because this is just unbelievable. And I feel like there's so much more we can traverse with this, but I want to make sure that I give you an ample opportunity to tell people where they can find you, where they can find the podcast. Of course, we'll link it all in the show notes, but where can people find you and connect with you?
Ryan, I love connecting with you. This has been amazing.
So fun.
Yeah, so fun. You can find me on Instagram, Farren Feiner, FarronFeiner. Link in profile. Anything you want to know, just DM me, whatever, hit me up. And the podcast is called Let's Go From Here. Wherever you listen to podcasts, it's a passion project and I've been evolving through it. It's me and my friend Heather, and it's really our stories of integration as we go along our journey. And it's been so fucking cool to have people like come talk to me about how me sharing a situation like help them, or come just ask for clarification questions and just start a discourse of something deeper, or rather than what am I programmed to say about the weather, about the world right now, and just really being able to connect with people, it's awesome. Yeah. I love it so much. And season 2 is coming out October 3rd.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. Yeah. And guys, like I said in the intro, I was recently a guest on there and it was so much fun. Both Farren and Heather are amazing hosts, and they ask great questions, and definitely go check it out. And also definitely check out Farren for all the things she's doing. And guys, was that an epic conversation or what? When Farren and I first met, I could feel her passion for life itself. And for me, feeling that energy is the number one thing that charges my battery to 11, in the wise words of Spinal Tap. For anyone looking to connect with Farren and take advantage of the incredible work she is doing in the world, make sure to check out the show notes for this episode, where I will be laying out all of the ways to do just that. Farren, thank you so much for sharing your time, wisdom, and experiences with the listeners and me today, for always charging my battery each time we chat, and for the important work you are doing in the world to usher in a more beautiful world for generations to come. And until next time, my friend, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.
Aho.